in the Axia world, we have a lot of things, not a lot of things, but we have some things that just flat won't function without PathFinder. And one of those things are like these LCD button panels that are in the console. We have LCD, OLED, and GPIO button panels that you can do all kinds of things with, right? But in and of themselves, they really don't do anything. You can, in the ones that go in the element, I could log in and I could assign these bottom 5 buttons to like a microphone source, and those buttons would do whatever the microphone's program GPIO was. But most people don't use those buttons for that. One of them's a dump button. Another one is to load a show profile. Some other buttons change routes. And so each button is individually programmed to do something special. And so without PathFinder to tell those buttons what to do, they just won't do anything, right? So there's a couple of different ways to build these button panels. I have a preference, and my preference is actually the one that takes a little bit longer to do, but at the end of the day, I think it's the better way to do it. The one way you can do it is you can go in here. And you can build just a true stacking event. And I'll demonstrate here one real quick so that you get the concept of why I would do it one way versus another way. So on the Stack Events tab in PathFinder, remember that stack events are all event-driven, right? That means that when something happens, here's the action that we take when that certain thing happens, right? So without going into too much detail, I'm just gonna add a stack group. Okay, so stack group is nothing more than just a container where you might organize various stacking events. They might be Station A, or Gino's stuff, or whatever. It's just a folder to put stacking events in to keep them organized. You can create as many stack event folders as you want, but I'm gonna work with this OLED button panel for right now. So that's what I'm gonna call my stack group. Okay, I'm gonna just call my stack group OLED panel. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add the actual stacking events that do something. So this is what the stack event editor looks like. Each stacking event has to have a unique name in the system. If I left this one as default and I saved it and I created a new one, it would come up as default 1, and then it would come up as default 2, right? I try to give them descriptions that actually mean something. So for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to say button 1 pressed, or button 1 down, or something of that nature, right? So that's down, that's up. Those are 2 distinct events that I can trigger things off of, right? So you could have them push that, and nothing would happen until they release the button, if that's what the qualifier said. So I'm just going to say button 1 down. Now notice how when I push the button over here on this panel, I know it's hard to see, I'm sorry about that. When I push the button, nothing happens. The lamp doesn't turn on, any of that kind of stuff, right? So I have to program this thing to do what I want. So my qualifier, so on the stack event editor, we have to have some qualifiers, a qualifier or qualifiers, right? Qualifiers might be button 1 down and button 2 down. In other words, nothing would happen unless both of those conditions were met. For purposes of just seeing the difference between ways to build up these button panels, I'm just going to make it a single stack event, right? So I got to add a qualifier. So down here where the add button is, I'm going to say add qualifier. And this shows you all of the different choices that you can have for qualifiers. We'll get into those more in detail, but route silence detect, audio clipping, is there level present, GPIs, GPIOs, user panel buttons, time ranges. Those are all things that we could trigger off of, right? Is a particular route made? Is source 1 routed to destination 5? In which case that qualifier would be met and the actions would be fired within the stack event. So for what I want to do, I'm working with user panel buttons, right? So if I just double click that, it brings me up to the parameters for that button. We'll come back to button name in a minute. I know that this device has an IP address, so it wants to know what's my host IP address. You're going to use, if I were to put a button in here, a button name, Bryan's dot button. Notice how the host IP address grays out. You either address this by a button name or by the host IP address. In my case, I'm going to use an IP address, and I know that the IP address of this unit is 10.0.3.4. Okay. Button module, there's only one to choose from. If I were to put in an IP address of, say, a console that had multiple button panels in it, I'd get a drop-down list of multiple button panels. So in my case, I can only pick one. And then what button number do I want? I want button number 1. Okay. So in terms of qualifiers, you can see what's not grayed out. I have key state that's not grayed out. I have button state. If I wanted to key off of me pushing that button, what might you think the qualifier might be?
Key state down.
Key state down, right? Because this doesn't turn the button on. I'm just monitoring for the key state, so I need to uncheck the no change, right? And I'm going to say down. So, and if you watch what happens here under the hood, just so we can kind of demystify this. Oops. 10, 0, 3, 4. I know that all of our remote control panels communicate on port 4010. And so I just telnetted into the box, and you can see when I push the button down, mod underscore user number 1, button number 1, key state down. And when I let go, it says key state up. So same thing with all of my other buttons. Okay, so that's the command that's actually going to PathFinder. PathFinder's logging in, it's watching for that message to come through, and that's how it knows that my key state is down.
There's cool.
You can do that to every Axia device. Everyone has port 4010 available for purposes of debugging and things like this.
What port does it accept messages?
4010.
42 both.
Yeah, if you wanted to have your audio vault send messages to turn these buttons on, change the text, audio vault telnet's in on port 4010, you send it the string that you want the text to say, and it'll change it.
That's cool.
It's cool stuff. So, and that, guys, really that's the goal here, is not to teach you how to become experts in all this, but just to give you enough understanding that the light bulb comes on and you walk away and go, I'll bet I can do this, right? Because I'm not going to teach you everything that this could possibly do in 2 days. It's just not going to happen. I'm still learning, and I've been doing this for 5 years. So, okay, so that's pretty much my qualifier.
Bryan, can you click on the drop down next to button number again, please? So if you look at the panel, it has 8 buttons. What are the others? Button number 17.
So we do make a 17-button panel. It's actually this one with a whole other row of buttons here. And in the element, while it's only a 10-button, notice how it also says disp. That's the display. So I can change the display on the element console, right? If I were going to update that. Now you wouldn't, yeah, you could have I don't know why you would ever do this, but if something were to change the text in the display to the word monitor, that could be your qualifier. in this stack event. Probably pretty obscure, that's way down in the weeds. You wouldn't be qualifying based on what somebody updated the text to, right? But you can change the text that's in there and it will scroll if you get longer than the 8 characters in there. But that's why you see, all it knows is that there's a user module out there. It doesn't know exactly down to the model number what that is, and that's why you see all 17 buttons, even though there are not 17 buttons on that particular panel. So that's my qualifier, okay? That's really all I really care about is did the user push the button down, right? And now I have these 4 other things. Actions if met. Okay, you understand that? When that qualifier is met, these are the actions that I'm going to fire. The delayed actions if met, right? Which means once I push the button, Pathfinder is going to start a timer, and it's going to fire those actions at some point, right? Assuming that action. So one of the things that you might do with the delayed actions if met is let's say you want a button to change a route, but you don't want somebody just accidentally bumping the button, right? What I might do is I might say user button down, but the delayed action is going to be a 5-second delay. So they have to hold the button down for 5 seconds before the route would actually change. That sort of just prevents the accidental tap, and all of a sudden we've changed what's feeding the transmitter, so on and so forth, okay? So, and then again on the actions if not met. In order for the actions if not met to fire, we first have to have an action if met. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So before these would fire, these would have to fire first. Because otherwise it's just always not met and it will be perpetually running. But you'll see how that works here in just a second. So, so my actions if met in this case is going to be another user panel button. Right? It could be a route, it could be send an email, it could be change a GPIO, any number of things. All right, I'm going to put my host IP address in here again. 0.3.4. Button is user 1. User button 1. And now what I'm going to do is what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the button state to being on. Okay? So when that user presses that down, the action is going to be to turn the button on. And then I might do one other thing, and I'm going to just update the caption to say hello. I can make it flash. I can do all kinds of fancy stuff. On this particular OLED button panel, the colors are not going to change because it's a single color OLED. Right? So you'll see things on here that may not apply to the particular panel that you're updating. Now, if I was down here on this LCD button panel, those are colored LCDs. So I could set the color of the button when it's on, set a different color when it's off, set it when a route is changed or something of that nature. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to do button state on and the button caption of hello. Now, okay, good. So I'm going to push the button that's going to turn it on, and then I need to turn it off somehow, right? So there's 2 ways to turn it off. One way is to just use our action if not met, right? So I could take my action, because I got it exactly the way that I want it, just drag it down here to my actions if not met, and then I'm going to change my button state to be off, and I will change the caption to say good. /n, that's a new line, which means it would put the text, instead of trying to cram it all on one line, it would organize it. Good, bye. Okay. So far, so good? Let's say okay, and then okay again. And if I've done this right, it doesn't. Oh, there we go. So you can see it's on now. The button, the display actually inverts when the button state is on, and it says hello. And when I let go, it says goodbye. All right. So that's my action if met. That's my action if not met. Okay. So that's one way to program buttons, and I could do that. That works exactly the same regardless of the user button type, whether it's this OLED, this LCD, the LCD that's in the console, those concepts are all the same. Here's the problem with using stack events as I see it. If I were to go reboot this, this would not remember that it's in this state. So let's just do that. Right here. Okay, so it's back up, but there's nothing on the button. So in order to get the buttons into the state that I need them in, I have to cycle them. Okay, because the stack events only do something when they're fired, right? Doesn't remember its state. So stack events, right directly to the user panel buttons, that's way number one to program those user buttons. But the way I prefer to do it, and I'm going to just disable this stacking event here so that it doesn't work anymore. And we're going to actually create a panel, software panel, and then what we're going to do is we're going to hardware map these buttons to the user panel buttons. And that way, if this reboots, PathFinder will remember the state and the text and everything that's on those buttons. So when I reboot it, the buttons will come back in the state that the software panel is in. So as long as PathFinder doesn't get rebooted, and that can be a real problem. If you're doing things in a console, right, and you have to reboot the console, we hope you don't have to do that very often, but you do sometimes. Software updates, production director spills water in the power station, whatever, right? We don't want them to have to be pushing every single one of those buttons just to get the state of the buttons back. So we're going to go to the Panels tab, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a software panel. Basically, it's going to do essentially the same thing, right? So if I add a panel, I can give this panel a name. We'll call it OLED. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag some things. Lots of things you can drag onto these panels. We're going to just make it very simple for the moment, and we're just going to put some buttons out here. So I'm going to drag a button out, and I'll make that button a little bit bigger. It's like a button number 1. 2. 6, 7, 8. Okay. So notice how those are all they're not lined up very well. They're all the same size because I copied and pasted them, all right? Line top, spread horizontally. Now they're all nice and organized. So now I can shrink this guy up. Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to program the buttons to do something. The button names, remember in the stack event editor, we could put either the host IP address or the button name. This is where the button name comes from. The button name is right here. OLED.button1. So it's a combination of the panel name and the button name. If I change the call button, we'll call it the hello button. Okay. Oh, no, I just want one. So now my hardware map internal name changed to OLED.hello. If I wanted to do something with that stack event when that button was pushed, that's the name that I would use in the stack event editor. okay? So really what I want to do with this button is I want to, I'm going to hardware map this particular button to this button right here. And to do that, it wants the hardware map host ID. So it's 10.0.3.4. User module is user number 1. We knew that because two things. It tells us right here, event mod user number 1, right? Sometimes the system's not really good about telling you what the user module number is. So you might have to telnet in on that port 4010 and push the button just to see what the user module number is. Because in an element console, if you had 2 button panels, one will be user 1, one will be user 2. One of them might be user number 7. It just depends on the ID of the switch that's underneath. So the easiest way I find to do it is just to telnet in. I don't even know what the IP address is of that console, otherwise I'd do that. Nobody's going anywhere, right? I could take a small detour. 4.1 is the IP address of that console. So if I telnet into new session 10.0.4.1 on port 4010, PuTTY is a great little tool. Anybody use PuTTY? Notice I'm always checking raw when I do that. If you check telnet, the backspace key is a key, and it sends the backspace to whatever the telnet device is. If you check raw, then you can backspace when you telnet in, and it doesn't send it until you actually press the enter key. So I'm just going to connect to my element console. This is on that port 4010, right? Same thing that I did on the panel. But if I push that button, that's actually user number 8, button number 1. And now I have complete control of this console. Any buttons that I push, it tells me exactly what buttons I push, right? If I select program monitor, so not everything does, but so assign program 3 on, assign program 3 off. So you're getting the indication that the button was pressed. I can actually send a set command and remotely assign it to program 3, remotely turn the module on. Guess what? That's how PathFinder does it. Telnet's in, sends plain text commands. So this is called LWCP, Livewire Control Protocol. It's all in a nice document. Happy to give it to anybody that wants it. Most of the time we don't give out the full protocol document because the protocol is a protocol document. It's not an as implemented document. So you'll find things in the protocol document that just don't work because they've never been implemented, right? So usually what happens is somebody says, hey, how do I do this? How do I make my automation system assign something to program 2? I'd send you the, here's the commands that you need to do that, okay? So you might have to telnet in on port 4010 just to know, well, what is this? What's this module and what button number is this? Well, I can see that that's user module number 8, key 1. Okay.
Is that the quickest way to determine?
It is. If you go into the module information page and you knew what the module number was of that button, you can get it from the module number. But for me,
That seems fast.
it's just easy to telnet in and have somebody push a button and then you're sure. Because if you get it wrong, it just won't work, and then you'll chase your tail and go, how come this isn't working? So, okay. So back to our hardware map. What I'm doing is I'm tying this software button by IP address. Notice how it already knows port 4010. It's user number 1 and it's user button number 1 as well. Okay. So while we're at it, let's just do button number 2 just for argument's sake. 10.0.3. 10.0.3.4. User number 1 and button number 2. Okay. So file, save panel as.
What
I'm sorry, user panel module. Describe that one again. Why is it users?
It's because it's actually called a user module.
Oh, in the.
Uses the whole lot.
This is actually, we call this a user module, and that's the whole panel.
Okay. Right, I understand the buttons, but why are there multiple users on that same IP?
Because if I'm in a console, I could have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these user modules. This one happens to be user number 8.
Okay, so it's the same, the same daughter board or same module.
It's the same protocol. This one would never have more than one user.
Right, that's why I was like.
You won't.
But
Right.
it still has the drop down.
It does, because remember that when I put that IP address in there, it doesn't have any facility to know that it's an 8-button OLED. Right? So it's just saying it's a user panel, and I know that it's going to be one of these. You pick which one it is, and that's why you got to do that 4010.
Does everybody know about the rotary switch to set those, since if you had 8 of those in a console?
Probably not. Every
Inside on the.
yeah, underneath.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever had a
Yeah.
console apart, the element consoles?
Yeah.
You know, on the underside, there's that rotary dip switch. There's a, every module type
Just to get on Pathfinder.
No, that's okay. Look, it's good to know this stuff, so. So in this, if I'm looking at, so right now I've logged into the power station, the console, right? And it's showing me all of the user modules that are installed in that console. So every user module, every module in a console has a type and an ID. So you'll see things like 2:1, 2:3, 2:4, 3:5. That first number tells us what type of module it is. So the 3 is this element call controller. The 2s are all of the regular fader modules. But you can see how, so that's the master module. Master module is where the monitor controls are. It's probably going to tell me that it's got an intercom in here. Yeah, intercom is a C, and then that module, that user module, is a type of, its type is 5, and its user module, its ID, that rotary dip switch that's on the bottom, is set to 7. But it's user module number 8. Want to take a guess at why?
It's the first module is 0.
Ding, ding, ding. 0 based. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's user number 8. So you can log into the web page, go find your user module, and if it's 5:2, what's the user module going to be? 3. Right? So you can either do it by telnetting in on 4010 or by just coming to the module information page and looking that up that way.
So if you're ever swapping modules between desks, say fault find, you've got to make sure that you've got module ID number at the back.
Correct. Yeah, otherwise you're going to have to reprogram all your Pathfinder stack events.
And
And the side effect, if you
You
put
have to
another
hold down
module in,
the-
it's got the same ID number.
Yes, correct. They have to be, so
Does it parallel?
the ID numbers have to be unique by module type, not by the whole console. So I could set one of these faders to an ID of 1, and I could still set the user module to 1. Because the fader is a 2:1, and this is a 5:1. So
Yeah, so you still have to, if you're installing a module in a console, do the thing where you power it up and hold a key combination. I can't remember what it is for it to recognize that it's got a new module.
only modules that carry audio. So if you so you got a console built and something happens to this user module. And so we send you another one, or you send it in, you get it repaired, whatever. As long as you put it on the same ID and plug it back in, you don't have to capture the console, right? And the user modules don't ever require a capture process. It's only the ones that are going to control audio. So if I were to, so same thing here, if I were to take this first module, replace it with another one, as long as I set the ID the same, I don't need to recapture the console. So the capture process is telling the engine, whatever it is, whether it's an element separate power supply GPIO or whether it's a power station, it's making the system go out and discover those module types and then remember them, how they're configured, so that we know that, you know, module ID 2:1, fader 1 is channel number 1, so on and so forth, right? So there's that capture process when you first build a console. But as long as everything goes back in with the same ID, you don't have to recapture that. But, so let's assume that we send you another one of these user modules, and you go, oh, my new module's in, I'm gonna pull screw out, plug it back in, plug it in, all of a sudden nothing works. The most likely candidate is what? The ID, right? Because the PathFinder stack events on our button panels are mapped to a specific user module and button, right? So if the one that comes out is on 7, and I put a new one in that's on 3, none of my PathFinder stack events are going to fire because nobody's pressing a button on user module number 8. It's not even there, right? So if you're replacing that user module, just make sure it goes back in with the same ID on the underside. It's just we'll try and grab one here before the day's out or tomorrow. It's just a rotary dip switch that's on the back
So
side.
you can do a total of 8 modules in any and that's it.
You could have
8 of the same.
no. It's 0 through 8, A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Okay.
So whatever that is, how many is that? 16.
And then that's where you're putting in the user, so that it identifies it
Right.
which panel it is, and then the button on that panel.
Yeah, you could have a console
Only
full of
in that, though.
you could have a console full of nothing but user module buttons. So, how many do you want? You need more than 16? 10 buttons a piece. That'd be what?
That'd be pretty fun.
That's a bunch of freaking buttons. So,
It's a hotkey mini array for a talent. you know?
yeah, we got some. Where's that? Somebody's got an element console with two 28 position frames bolted together, and nothing but, I mean, they've got probably 8 or 10 rows of buttons. I don't, is that NRJ that does that?
NRJ in France
It's
is the
pretty
biggest-
impressive.
Is the biggest element,
Yeah.
the biggest single element put together. And it's
You can have
massive.
in an element console, you can have a maximum of 42 faders. Faders. That doesn't include things like intercoms and user panels and things like that. So they get bigger than you could probably reach without having to.
Are they remixing them together? Is that
Oh,
no, it's not.
42 faders.
So they
Yeah.
haven't exceeded that.
They have not.
So,
Are they more than that?
I thought it was 40.
42. If anybody ever gets to 42 and it's a problem, let me know. Then we can arm wrestle for whether it's 40 or 42. So, well, you could do.
now, can the power station actually handle mixing 42
Yeah.
simultaneously with an DSP without?
Yeah.
Network handle?
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. You're only,
Yes.
you know, I mean, it's gigabit Ethernet, right? So,
From a practical standpoint, Axia can not a practical, from a technical standpoint, Axia can handle more faders being mixed than any other system out there, with the possible exception of Lavo. I'm not sure what Lavo's limitation is, but all the other guys, Wheatstone is 24, SAS is down in the 20s, Logitech is down there. There's nobody else that can handle that many, and 40 is, that's 42 stereo, because each one of those ones can be, so you're talking about 84 actual channels of audio getting mixed across 4 buses and 4 aux buses. So it's, yeah, it's a pretty massive DSP going on.
pretty amazing considering up until first part of this year, we were doing it in a Core 2 Duo Pentium processor. So,
But then you get into what Bryan was saying, practically, with the routing capabilities, you don't get into many people that need more than 24,
Right.
28 faders. And the France one, there's still some big stations out there that are exceptions where they say, oh, we don't want the route. You know, we've got operators that don't know how to do profile switches and this, so we want all the big desks with all the never gonna change anything.
Plus, it looks cool.
And it looks cool, and you know, we make more money that way, so we only try to talk them out of it for about 3 or 4 minutes.
Buy as many faders as you want. That's right.
Host A sits on the left and host B sits on the right.
That's right. You know, and so yeah, and then you get into the split frame configurations, which give you more flexibility for more faders.
Hope the wheels on their chairs.
What's that?
Hope the wheels on their chairs. To drive them
Or
up
at
there.
least a couple of people that run that console. One of the two. So, I can't change colors, so let's not worry about color too much. But back to this panel, essentially what I've done here is I've just mapped this button. Now it could be this button, which is button number, it could be mapped to button number 1. And within a panel, I mean, you might have a panel that's in an engineering room and another panel that's in the studio, and all of those buttons could be on one page. There's nothing that says that so this button could be going to this panel, this button could be going to that panel over there, we could have another button which goes to this panel. So each individual object in this software panel can be individually mapped to a different hardware device. Make sense? Okay, so let's save that. Now let's go to our, what did I call? This is actually OLED Hello. This. So I'm going to use the same stack event, but instead of driving this by IP address, I'm going to drive it by button name. You notice how all the rest of that stuff grays out, right? So this is where that button name comes into play, right? So it's the panel's actually talking to an object within PathFinder rather than going here to get the state of the button. Enable this. I'll take it just a second. Now, if I go to my PathFinder client, if I've done all this right, hello. You know what I bet I did?
Didn't save.
Did I not? Oh, I never did save, did I? So you can pull these panels out. You can work. Panel Designer runs as a standalone application. You can pull these panels out and you can edit them elsewhere and just drop the XML file in. But at the end of the day, everything needs to live in this Program Files, Pathfinder Server, PFS Panels folder. So once I save that, now what should happen is close that and launch it. It should know about user panels. So user panels will let me, within the Pathfinder client, see these panels that I've created. So there it is. It already says goodbye, which matches up with this one here. Notice how this one switched to button number 2 because I hardware mapped that second button to this panel. And now it doesn't matter where I push the button. Right? Because now what's happening is this button is really driving the panel, right? Which is then in turn updating the software panel. So I can actually click the button here. Notice how this follows?
When you reboot it.
Yeah, let's do that. it'll take it just a second. It won't snap back instantly because there's a connection process. It has to go reconnect. Pathfinder has to notice that there, they just came back. All right. So if I were to, I'm not sure I can do both. Let's make that a. I was going to try and hold the button down and reboot this panel all at the same time, but my arms aren't quite long enough. So that's the reason why you might create a software panel and then hardware map your buttons to that panel, is so that it would survive that reboot. It sort of remembers the state. And then the other thing you can do is if the only place you have to route audio from is by pushing this button, and nobody's in that studio, well, that's a problem. But if you have a software panel, then you guys can all log in remotely. If you go to the Pathfinder client, launch your panel, and you can do the same thing from within software. Make sense? Any questions?
I have kind of a different question. It's kind of specific to our facility. Currently in our studios, we have real buttons actually to control closures on our radio network. And I'd like to move that all into Axia.
Sure.
And I'd like them to be controllable via playlist items. So local break is part of a playlist, or for certain shows, driven from buttons, from multiple studios, depending on where the show might originate.
Yeah.
Who knows? Just kind of want to talk about the process of getting that going, and then making it all translate from wide orbit, which doesn't speak the language of native. So, how much time do you have? Is that something we want to go? I mean, is it beneficial to maybe just a small example of configuring something like that to have buttons, from hardware devices and from kind of an automation all doing the same thing.
So there's a lot of things that you can make the buttons do, right? So we'll take button number 8, and I'm going to make button number 8 create a contact closure on a GPIO node somewhere. Okay. So let's come on, Jake, you're up. So let's use button number 8, and remember. So what you're looking at right now is you're looking at Pathfinder PC actually running the panel. So I can't really edit anything from right here. So go ahead and close Pathfinder PC, just so that we're not confused by it and get it out of the way. Okay, so now we're in our panel designer. Notice how they look very similar. So let's give this button. Let's give this button a name. So not there, but if you change it up in the name field up top. Okay, good. So if you tab past that, now notice our button changed. Do you want to put a caption on the button? You can change that caption from button 8 to change it to local. Okay. Let's change our back color to something else. Pick a pretty color. It won't work on the. We're going to hardware. Let's just cancel out of that for me. Sorry. This is on an all-in panel, so.
Only those ones do that, or
The film cap one, the in-element film cap ones are an 8-bit LED. So.
okay.
Well, but we're controlling. Oh, you want to do one of those?
Well,
that's in the console, or you want to do one of the?
we could do colors another time. We'll just do this.
Okay. So So now we need to hardware map that software button to that 8th button on that console. Remember how to, on that user panel, remember how to do that?
Not exactly.
So notice how that button has that gray square around it. If you click on one of the other buttons, it's important to remember which control is highlighted before we go changing things. So go back to your local button. And then down towards the bottom of that list on the other side, it has map host IP. Hardware map host IP right there. So we got to put the IP address of that. Yep. And then the user panel module. Is it drop down? It's 1. Yep. And then button number 8.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I may have missed this because I was dealing with other stuff. Can you only do panel designs for existing hardware panels? Like what,
No, you don't have to have the hardware panel at all. You could do just software and not hardware map those buttons to anything.
So basically creating the hardware just in software if you wanted to.
Yes. I mean, we're doing, even if we didn't hardware map those buttons to this user panel button, we could still have that software button control and trigger things in Pathfinder.
Or could it be to some other hardware switch that's not an Axia?
That was hooked up to like a GPIO node?
GPIO, so
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
regular-
I mean, that's essentially what we're gonna do is when they push that button, we're gonna turn on an output on a GPIO for some period of time, half a second, or maybe we leave it on as long as they
1
hold the
second.
button down.
So what do
Am I-
people do?
Am I chilling you out of here?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That's pretty good. Do people have dedicated monitors for these things floating around, or like where do people normally host this panel?
Sometimes.
Do they just remote, they just hold up on the computer?
Yeah, a lot of times the panel won't get pulled up unless they need it. They'll need to change some route, load some profile, do something remotely. They don't usually run these. If they need it there all the time, it's usually on some kind of a hardware panel that you can press. So, okay, good. So I think that's all we need to do for that button. So let's go ahead and save our panel. We can just do file save. At some point, our description will update over there. Now what we need to do is we need to build a stack event that actually does something. Yep. And you can, if you just double click on that group, nope, sorry. Cancel. Double click on that guy. We'll put it in that same OLED panel group. So we're going to just add a new stacking event here. Give it a name. Button 8. Okay, local will work. And then for a description, yeah, you don't need to put anything in there, but you certainly can if you want to. Okay, so we need to add a qualifier for this stack event. You can do one of two ways. You can either hit that drop-down list, or if you double-click in that qualifiers field, that's what it'll bring up for you.
Is it a user panel button?
It is.
And name? Is it-
The name. Okay, so this is the name for the qualifier, not the name of the button that we're using. Understand the difference? In order to trigger off of that button, we need to give that. Yep, and then button name down below. You can see what your button name is over there, still on the other side. It's actually OLED.local. Yep. And then, there you go. Okay, that's good. That's really the only qualifier in this case. Nothing else we really care about. So, actions if met. So now we need to do something when the button is pressed. Now in Jake's case, he's going to cause some GPIO node to go low for some duration when that user presses that button. So in this case, that's what the action would be. It would be GPIO state change. And we gotta pick a router. Yeah. Notice how, go back to that router list for just a second. How many routers do we have in our system?
3.
We have 3. We have,
Oh, the virtual.
we have, right. But notice how there's only 2 in that list? It's only showing you routers that have GPIOs in them. So that's why it's not showing us the audio router, because there's no, for a GPIO state change, there's no audio router, there's no GPIO in that. So anything GPIO, and yeah, these are not very well named, so we'll just pick one. So once I've picked, so the GPIO, you know, in the Axia world, we've got these 15-pin D connectors on the back for GPIO, right? So when it says GPIO 1, that's talking about the entire port, right? All 15 pins, specifically the 5 output pins. So, okay, Jake's ahead of us on this. We picked the output, so the output closure is just asking you which pin do you want, pin 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. What's the state that we want it to go to? We want it to go low, and we want it to pulse for 1 second. Right? So regardless of how long the user pushes the button for, that GPIO is going to come on, it's going to stay on for 1 second, and then it's going to open back up. Okay, so say all right. And that should be all we need to do. Now, let's add some kind of a tally back with something that we actually did something, right? So I could have it so that when they push the button, the lamp came on the button, but it would be better to know that when they push the button that the fact that the lamp came on is because it's monitoring that GPIO. All right, so let's create another stack event in our stack group.
Aren't you going to have to create an action if not met as well on that?
Nope, because he gave it a 1,000
the duration,
millisecond
yeah.
pulse duration. So, okay, anybody want to take a guess at what so it's cause and effect, right? I like to have the button does something when we push it, but the button turns on not because we pushed the button, but because the action that we told it to fire actually happened. Does that make sense?
Is it a
Right.
route?
It's not a route.
It's not a route.
Nope.
The GPIO
GPIO
state
status.
change is the qualifier.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep. And it's, yep. And what was it, that first one that we picked?
So like that GPIO goes off, it's like, oh my God.
Correct. And that's how the user would say, hey, I pushed the button and I didn't get any feedback, so nothing happened, right?
No.
Yep, so is it low? And then the action, if met, is going to be how about user pad button? Yep,
There it
it's
is
just-
at the top. Thank you. Is it OLED.local?
It is OLED.local,
Did you make it ring a bell into the Q speaker?
probably.
Now what do we, that color?
No, we want to change the button state to, we want to change the button state to on, and let's make it flash.
Okay.
Okay?
That it?
Yep. So, okay, go back to that tally for just a second. Having that lamp come on for just the 1 second might not be long enough for the user to actually notice that something happened. So let's flash that button for 5 seconds if we get a successful pulse. Make sense?
Yes.
So with the GPIO going low, we turn the button on. But if we didn't do anything else, what would happen to that button? So remember that
It would stay on.
the button would stay on, right? Because we haven't explicitly told the button to turn off. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, there you go, the delayed action if met. And it's also a user panel button.
Oh, it is?
Yep. And button state, we're going to turn it to off, and we're going to turn the flash off. Okay? Anything else we need to do on that?
And because the delay is set for 5 seconds, that's how long it will flash?
Yep. You could change it to, if you press the little double arrow or the little arrow key, there's some presets there, right? I think the maximum is,
Minutes.
I don't think you can do, you might be able to do 1 minute.
5 seconds.
Yeah, 5 seconds is a good duration. So say okay, and then okay again. Now push that button up there. That's it. That meant that we fired the contact closure. Pathfinder saw the contact closure actually happen, and it flashed the button for 5 seconds.
So it didn't fire off when you pressed the flash didn't happen. When you pressed the button, it actually happened, and it saw the contact closure, and that's it.
Correct.
Now, since it's, I mean, you could get really custom and have the action, if met, be coming from a number of different sources, different buttons, and have each one of those panels flash
Yes, it doesn't.
every time.
it-
Like, so if you pressed it in another room, it would still
Correct.
flash in all the rooms.
That button
Would.
is going to, let me steal a chair back from you for just a second. Let's find out where that, so what he was saying was that lamp is going to flash regardless of who closes that contact closure, right? Because it's not the press of that button, it's the fact that the GPIO went low. So let's go, so first thing that should happen is if we do it here, right? That should do the same thing. Now I want to look at one thing here. More under the hood stuff. You guys seem to like that under the hood stuff, so we'll show you some more under the hood stuff. Edit. So the GPIO is, what's the IP address of that? Okay, so that's on a node, 10.0.1.10. New session, 10.0.1.10. Previous port was what port? 4010? Okay, so that was LWCP, Livewire Control Protocol. Now we're going to deal with what we call LWRP, which is Livewire Routing Protocol. That is on port 93. You won't need to know that. Well, you might. Not totally unrelated to Pathfinder. That's all Axia stuff, but that's good, good takeaway information because you can do a lot of troubleshooting, just by going to port 93. So if I connect. Okay, so now I have a connection to that GPIO node. I don't know what it is. I think it's one of those back there in the rack. But now that I'm connected to it, I can ask it a couple of things. I can say add. Oops, it's got to be in caps. Add GPO, and what it's going to do is it's going to echo back to me the status of those bits on those ports. Right, so I can tell you right now, port 1, HHHHH, that's the 5 output bits, and right now they're all high, they're all open, they're not closed. If one of them were closed, it would say LHHHH. So by typing add space GPO, I have just subscribed to the contact closures on that node. So if you had an automation system that you wanted to watch for some contact closure to come in, you'd use your audio vault, you'd make a telnet connection to port 93 of that node, you'd tell the audio vault to send add GPO, and then when that GPIO, when that contact closure fires, it just sent me the command that it went low for 1 second and back to high. So I'm listening for that connection on that port. That's my confirmation that that contact closure really fired. That makes sense? So, and notice how our button on the back there, you just see it blinking back there? See? Okay, so now watch this. So I'm going to not push the button to fire the contact closure. I'm going to say, so if I want to, so add space GPO subscribes to the output status. Add space GPI subscribes to the inputs status. So if somebody were to close a button, you know, a hard button, right, it would send me the GPI1 LHHHH, depending on which one of those actually closed. But one of the things that I can do is I can, through this interface, I can command that output to fire. So in order to do that, I have to type login and press enter. If I had changed the password to something other than user and no password, I'd have to log in space and the password that you set on the node, okay? This is exactly what PathFinder is doing when it logs into those nodes initially. Same exact telnet commands. And now I can say GPO 1L, and when I press enter, our light should start flashing right there. Okay, that contact closure is now low. Is that true, David?
I think it's a 1.10.
Yeah, it's a mixed signal node.
Yeah,
So are you on the mixed signal node?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I think it looks like it turned on.
Yeah, and then, so I turned it on, and what it did is the reason why you see it twice, this was me sending it the command, this was the echo back that the state changed, right? And then, so if I set it back to high, GPO 1H, now it's ready to be cycled again, so. All right, so it takes, in one stack event, I could have made that button flash when the user pressed it, but that really doesn't give me any feedback that what I wanted to happen really happened. All right, so if David were to reach around behind that GPIO node and just unplug it so that it's not on the network anymore, can you do that? Just pull the network cable out. Won't flash. Better not flash. Can you get to it? Okay, yeah, that's it, because it's dark. So now if I push the button, nothing. Hey, Jake, I'm pushing this button and nothing's happening. So go ahead and plug it back in. And it's a PoE node, so not only did we just disconnect it from the network, we completely shut the node down. So I'll get into a lot of systems where people have just, you know, they've taken the easy way out, which is press the button, you make it flash for 5 seconds. Great. That doesn't really do anything. It really doesn't do anything for me. I much prefer to have 2 stack events so that you get some feedback, right? And so the cool thing there is that if that's, you know, if that module exists everywhere, then regardless of who closes it, that module's going to flash. So,
can you map a single software button to several hardware devices? For an example,
you cannot. You'd have to have a separate panel for each hardware device. So,
What happened if you had two panels channeled up, two button panels channeled up in the same console to the same channel? Would they mirror each other?
Say that again?
If you had two 10-button panels in a console and you didn't select different channels, you selected for some reason, you put the same channel on through it in a console, you plugged it up.
That about
Okay.
rotary switch on
Right.
that?
They are, no, those dip switches are unique to this particular IP address.
Okay.
So if you put that same one in another console,
No, I'm talking about in the same console.
But if you have two modules and they both have the same rotary,
I think neither of them are gonna work.
Okay,
Be like having duplicate IP addresses.
okay. Interesting.
So it's when the element software that's in the power station, there's a communication process that happens to the devices. So it's going to send it something and expect something back, and it would be thoroughly confused. What it would probably be doing would be issuing resets. It would think something's wrong with the CAN bus, and it would be issuing resets to the CAN bus all the time. So you'll know pretty quickly if you have them on the same device ID because nothing will work. Make sense?
Can Pathfinder control the level of a fader?
Yes?
Yes. Is it possible then to set up an event if clipping happens for X amount of seconds, lower the fader?
Yes, but it can't. You have to set the fader to a certain level. You can't say lower it by 5 dB or 10 dB, right? Because it has no knowledge of where the fader really is. But you can say, if it clips, you can start a timer and say if the clipping doesn't go away, set the fader gain to -10, whatever, right? Better yet, you just.
That would help.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about, it happens in our place from time to time. DJ will have the fader down. He'll start the event and walk out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it happens at night after the end of the show.
Sure.
Frequently, and then every 30 seconds my phone starts ringing silence.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'd like to do is have an event monitor the silence there and say, okay, it's happened this long.
Set the fader to
Set
zero.
all the faders that are normally need to be up
Mhm.
to this level.
Yep. You'd never
And quit bothering me.
on a on a console that so that's a oops. Okay. So let's get
And I know you can, you know, silence detect, send an automation command like start next event.
Mhm.
That's a lot of that's common, but
So if I create a new stack event, let's call this Platoon button 7. Qualifier. Now in this case, I'm not gonna bother hard software mapping the button to it. I'm just gonna make this button set the fader levels, right? So it's user panel button. In this case, we're going to use what? We're going to use an IP address instead of a name, right? 10, 0, 3, 4.
Did we just name it though? Did we just name it OLED or?
If I did that, I'd have to go back to Panel Designer,
Okay.
and then I'd have to give it a name, and I'd have to hardware map it
Okay.
here, right? For purposes of this argument, I'm not going to hardware map that button because I just want something to happen
Okay.
when I push the button. So button module 1, button 7, key state down, and then my action if met is going to be Axia element console change. Make sense? We're gonna, basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna virtually set the fader level to 0 on 1 or 2 or 3 faders every time that button gets pressed, okay? So we're going to do an Axia element console change. The element console shows up in our drop-down list because we added it through the ad. When you did the ad, when you built the audio router, it goes out and it knows that there's an engine there. And now there's 2 ways to control these faders. You can either control it by Livewire channel number. So if I had my automation, let's say my automation faders were Livewire channel 1000, 1001, and 1002.
That'd be preferable.
Well, if I knew what they were here, I'd do it that way, right? I could come in here and I could say for Livewire channel number 1000, wherever it is on the board, doesn't matter where it is, I want to set the fader gain to -80 is nothing. So I think I want to set the fader gain to 0. Okay, that's all I want to do. I want to set the fader to 0 when that button gets pressed. Now, for purposes of this demonstration, I don't know what the Livewire channel is. So I'm going to take that out of there and I'm going to say, let's use fader number, I'm going to do 3, 4, and 5. Fader number 3. Okay? So in this element, fader number 3, fader gain to 0 when that button gets pressed. So I'm going to duplicate this. Notice how I just drug it down, right? I want to do the same thing to fader number 4. And I'm going to do the same thing to fader number 5. Okay? So far, so good? Let's okay that, okay that. And now if I push that button, you didn't see anything happen.
The arrow should be.
But yeah, but if you look at the console, I got an up arrow on those consoles, which means that the physical faders they're down below where the actual fader level is. So if I run this, can you guys see this here on this console?
Recaptures it when you lift it up, right?
Right. Well, once I gotta go find it, right? So it doesn't immediately capture it when you start to move the fader. You gotta go. You gotta get to it, right? And then once I get to it, then the fader number will come back. Right, so that way you don't, when you move the fader, the level doesn't drop. So if I move all these up,
If they were motorized, they would jump.
if they were motorized, they would move. They,
And you can do that for clipping, like he said, you do the same thing. And
Uh-huh.
your arrow would be down, and once
That
you pull it down.
clipping would be your qualifier.
correct.
The other thing I was thinking about, I have a particular board op who just never pays attention to meters. I mean, never. I mean, it's clipping constantly all the time. Just injected annoying sound in his headphones every time he does it.
Like it's the voltage to his chips.
It was,
Yeah.
or probably do it for that, for clipping, they had a thing called the land test. And they tied the clipping detect to the land test. So every time the board clipped, the whole board would just.
Oh,
Oh.
And what's interesting, we didn't tell anybody, and the board op said, hey, by the way, the board once in a while just lights up like.
yeah, that's because you're not doing your job.
Exactly.
Pay attention. So,
Would another alternative be to send an email to the accounts department? Bill them $5
well,
every
we could
time?
do, yeah, you could do both, right? So in our PathFinder server here, for my, so what I call this one, button 7. So in addition to turning the console channels on, I'm going to add a new action with Matt, and I'm going to say, where is it? Send email.
Text the dude.
Well, I'm going to text the program director is what I'm going to do, right? You can't send text messages
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can.
VTEX.
Email.
via email, that's right.
Do you have to set up an SMTP so
You do. So one thing that PathFinder cannot do yet is you can't use Gmail or Yahoo Mail. It's got to go really to an SMTP server. But what we typically do is we'll take and we'll install, if you're installing PathFinder on a server OS,
Windows can do it native.
right, yeah, you just install the little SMTP server client, sends it to localhost, and then it can do an SMTP relay, because a lot of mail servers won't allow relaying from weird addresses or things like that. But yeah, you do have to go in here to the email alert settings, and you got to give it an email server or an account and things like that. So, but it's all within that same stack event, right? And again, it wouldn't matter, you know, you could have a button panel. We could hardware map that to a software button, so that nobody would have, you wouldn't have to say, hey, go walk in there and press the button in the studio, right? We could do the same thing by finishing what Gino was asking me about, which is set this and 034.
So here's what I want to do one day. It sends me an email. I want it to be able to accept an email, to reply, to do whatever I need it to do.
We had talked about that. Actually, an email, so it would be a protocol translator,
Yes.
and the protocol translator would say email received, and so you could put the command that you wanted to run into the protocol translator, right? It would receive the email, recognize some string that you had typed into that email, and it would execute that based on that. So whatever you put in, right?
Yeah. Start.
That's a little risky because it's, you know,
It gets an out of office reply.
right. Over and over and over and over again. Sends the message that says it was silent and then gets the response back, and we get in this loop,
The
right?
trouble ticket system works kind of like that, and you can reply to the email that it sends you
Mhm.
with the pound one, pound two, or pound somebody's name, and it assigns it to that person. And that's when you use that. I mean, we use that sort of thing now, but I never thought of doing it this way. But that's a great idea. It's just kind of scary.
So I've got a couple other things I'd like to show you on these button panels, like how to make routes. The routing is kind of cool because it doesn't have it isn't reliant really on PathFinder stack events to make routes. You can program the button to actually just take a route, and then anytime that route is active, the button is lit. Let's take a little 10-15 minute walkabout, pee, get some coffee, get a drink, and we'll come back and we'll play with these panels some more. Yeah?
Sound good?
You guys good with that? What time's everybody want to get out of here today? I was thinking 4 o'clock, between 4 and 4:30. Would anybody want to stay till 6 or 7 o'clock at night? What do you want to do? I think you guys have dinner plans tonight, right? Is Cam? Tonight?
They said,
Sounds like it's a
they
group,
said they might break it into groups.
Okay. I don't know. Cam's the social director. I'm just the.
I'd like to work on more stuff. I'm wanting to learn as much as I can.
Okay.
Does your Wi-Fi prevent VPN access?
Shouldn't.
No, I think-
No, I think you too.
Yeah.
It's just
Must
used.
be a VPN.
Yeah, I mean, I can stay as late as anybody wants to stay. My guess is that tomorrow we'll have a lot of time to, build all kinds of stuff, so.
I'd like to get into the panel designer when it comes to, I just haven't used it a lot, but metering and some things that are user-friendly, but, a normal jock-looking, basic panel that does the things that they need, has some basic status stuff on there.
Yeah,
and,
show them what's routed where. I mean, there's a lot of things that, I still want to show you guys, and that's, one of the things that we can update the button text with the name of the source that's routed at the time. So it can say, you can have a label that basically will tell you what
studios to air or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And even at a more rudimentary level, if somebody goes and manually changes a route, right? Because we can change a button label based on the fact that somebody pushed a button and that a profile loaded on the console. But if somebody goes to right to the node and changes picks a source and hits apply, the label has a property on it. It says source name. And then it'll just update that label with the source name rather than whatever you typed on the label, right? It'll actually give you the source name of the device. So there's lots more to do. So, I can't believe my email is not just burning up today.
That's a good thing.
Your auto reply says you're teaching today, right?
It does, yeah. But that still doesn't
Yeah,
prevent
doesn't
people
stop you
from, right.
Yeah. Ryan, can you, like, where we checked for silence and raised a fader, if we were gonna do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that we can do that recursively at greater fader levels? Can we look for a particular level and
We don't have any way to query the faders for what their
the
current
actual
level is.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that is coming in, I don't think it is. There's no real way to say, hey, it's, increase it by 5 dB, does that correct the clipping?
Right.
Or the silence? Nope, increase it by another 5 dB. There's no way to do that presently.
That's
Mostly because we don't have a way to ask it,
to
where's
ask
the
what the
faders?
current level
Right.
is.
Could you do it within the setting for the channel trim? Doesn't matter.
You can't change the trim gain through Pathfinder. We've been asked for that a lot of times. I just don't think there's any way to, there's no way to get it done at the moment.
It's one of the things that we have come up, we can make it check for silence and do this, or check for clipping and do that, but doing it recursively until it reaches a certain point.
Right, right. And I mean, the danger is, what happens if that's not the reason for the silence, right?
Well,
Now all of a sudden, if the transmitter's off and we're monitoring for silence, now all of a sudden we got faders ran all the way up against the stops. And when we do come back on, now we're going to be clipped because we
That's
just,
right.
you know what I mean? So
That's
it's one of those things where,
We try not to write those unless we check for multiple.
yeah, right. Well, it depends on where you.
Yeah, where you're grabbing it from.
Right, because you can monitor the silence at lots of points
Right.
along the way. You can monitor the direct program out of here. So you say, okay, program is silent and transmitter is silent.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Right.
If transmitter is just silent, then we don't do that.
Don't
same
do
thing.
that step.
Right.
Yeah.